As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and the big news today is that Governor Ron DeSantis is poised to announce his candidacy for President of the United States as early as filing paperwork, potentially, according to Reuters and a few other media sources, as May 25th, which is next Thursday. So, of course, we will be talking about that on this show, and today I will be joined by my good friend Steve Cortes, who also joined me this morning on my terrestrial radio show, nationally syndicated on American Family Radio Network. You can find that interview, which was kind of the first part to this program, at afr.net for American Family Radio, afr.net. You can click the link to Jenna Ellis in the Morning, which is my show, and listen to that interview. He is right off the top. And we spoke about a number of these things, and I'm going to ask him again as well where he was at with President Trump in 2016, 2020, why he is now endorsing Ron DeSantis. I think that's very important for everyone who didn't listen this morning to hear yet again. But then we're kind of going to continue the conversation with some brand new questions and a continuation of some things that we didn't have the opportunity in more of a limited, I only have an hour on radio. There's always so much more to talk about. So we're going to continue that with Steve Cortes. And I want to always have these conversations. I know a lot of people are very, very pro-Trump, and they're kind of this only Trumper crowd. I have not endorsed a candidate in the primary. At this point, I do not plan to. My radio station is a nonprofit, so as an organization, of course, they can't endorse any political candidates. I can in my personal capacity. Here on Salem Media, it's a little bit different. But I have chosen not to because I do want to highlight the good, the bad, and the ugly of everything. And once you kind of endorse and are an advocate for only one candidate, that puts you in a little bit different of a mindset with respect to media in particular. Because once you endorse a candidate, then it's a lot more difficult to acknowledge perhaps some of the negatives and to not just accentuate the positives. And certainly, and as I've expressed with Steve Cortes, and we'll continue this conversation, when he and I were both working for President Trump, it was our job to emphasize the positives, really diminish any of the negatives. And even if we personally, in our own personal mindset, disagreed with a policy position or a media talking point, the job is to represent the candidate, the office, or the principal. And everybody knows that who has ever represented a company, or they have ever been part of a political campaign as someone who is actually an officer of the campaign. And, that doesn't mean that you go out and you spin the truth or, you lie or any of that kind of stuff. But it does mean that you represent the policy positions and the viewpoint of the person that you're working for. And it's very different when you are truly independent media. And that's where I want to be. And, I loved working for President Trump. I agreed with, probably 98% of his policies, what decisions he made, all of those things. And so it was very easy to represent him, not easy in the sense that I wasn't attacked for it, but it was very easy to advocate because it was actually what I agreed with. Every lawyer will tell you they have clients that are just very difficult, or, you disagree with them on certain things. Sometimes it doesn't rise to the level that you have to conflict off, but there's actually a special rule under the law that if you are asked by a client to, break the law, suborn perjury, that kind of thing, or you simply disagree with the strategy, the trial strategy with your client, then you can get out of the case and say, I can't represent them anymore. And the reason for that is because there are different conflicts when you're representing, whether it's a client in a legal capacity or just as an officer of a campaign. And so all of these things, in my view, just point to the fact that a lot of people who worked for Trump that are now supporting DeSantis, like my good friend Steve Cortes, or like me, are not supporting Trump or DeSantis over one another, just simply talking my personal opinions about both of them, positive and negative. And I've gone after DeSantis for what he's doing with Disney. I disagree with that perspective. Often the response to that is, well, you're just paid off, or you're being disloyal, or you must have then been lying when you worked for him and you weren't really loyal on his team. Well, no, that just means that now, as independent media, I can speak the full breadth of my opinions without being concerned for loyalty and a fiduciary responsibility to a client. And that's a very different position, and why I think the independent nature of the media and the freedom of the press is so incredibly important. Because when you have somebody who's a spokesperson for an individual on your show, you kind of know what they're going to say. It's going to be positive about whatever they're speaking on. That's the whole point of having representatives, having spokespersons. So I think it's very important to not only this audience, but also my AFR audience and my Twitter following, all of that, to get my unvarnished opinions on the whole scope of things and where I agree with and disagree with both Trump and DeSantis and every other candidate. So that's what you're going to get on the show. And if you just want, a Trump spokesperson, well, that's not going to be this show, and I make no apologies for that. I had a great opportunity to work for President Trump, but as independent media now, I think that is a highly valuable viewpoint and a valuable position that I'm very grateful to be in now, in my post-Trump tenure. I declined to go back and work for him, and that's okay. And I still, if it becomes the nominee, I will vote for him. And if Ron DeSantis is the nominee, I will certainly vote for him as well. Any other candidate on the GOP, I will vote for to save the country over and against what the Democrats are doing. So that was kind of a longer opening than we're used to on this, but I wanted to give you the full kind of scope of where we're at with this, where I'm at with this. And, it's not for any other reason. A lot of people have, referred to the Colorado censure for my bar license, which in my personal opinion, was unnecessary and unwarranted, but that is what it is. That had no impact on my view of moving forward. Everything to me is about the truth, and it's about recognizing where are we at as a country, and let's put up the best champion that we can. And there are great arguments for and against both Trump and DeSantis. So we're going to talk about that with my good friend Steve Cortes. I'm going to have pro-Trump people on as well. But this time it's going to be Steve Cortes, and he's coming up, and you're not going to want to miss this. Listen to this with an open mind right after this. With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to your to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you. So joining me now is the man himself, Steve Cortes, from now the Never Back Down PAC, which is encouraging Governor Ron DeSantis to run for president. And it looks like he is going to announce sometime late next week, maybe into the following week. And so, Steve, even though you, as I mentioned in the opening, you joined me on radio this morning, but for those who didn't have an opportunity to listen to that, I wanted to ask you the initial question again, which is you have worked for President Trump before. You and I were colleagues on his 2020 reelection campaign. You are now supporting DeSantis. The allegation, of course, is always, well, you're just now a never Trumper. You just hate Trump. There's a personal reason. You're just getting paid. It couldn't possibly be that there is a rational, logical explanation for your move to support Governor DeSantis for president. So respond to that and tell us actually, genuinely, why you are supporting Governor DeSantis for president.
Sure. And Jenna, thank you for having me again, for giving me the opportunity twice in a day to speak with you, which is always a pleasure. And most importantly, to speak to your terrific audience. Listen, I think, unfortunately, there's so few people in American politics today who operate on principle that when somebody does, it's hard for the electorate to believe that, okay, wait, what's behind this? There has to be something untoward here. No, it is a principled decision that I am advocating for Ron DeSantis. I was previously honored, as you were, I was honored to advocate and fight for President Trump. And I've spent most of the last 7 years of my professional life working either directly or indirectly on behalf of President Trump. And I'm very proud to have done that. I think he was exactly the disruptor we needed in 2016. But when I look at the situation today and going forward, and if I take a rational, non-emotional look at the situation, both on the negative and positive side, the negative side of the successive losses that we have had, 2018, 2020, 2022, at least relative to expectations in this most recent election. If I look at that string of losses, if I look at the prospects of who is the best candidate who can both win the general election and implement the most conservative possible policy agenda as president of the United States, I come to the positive conclusion that that candidate is Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. So I think, too, regarding, if I could just speak to that issue of, I'm getting attacked, quite a lot. I know you do as well, from some of the Trump crowd. A couple of issues there. One is I'm constantly being attacked lately as being disloyal. Well, I'm only loyal to the United States in a permanent way. Okay, I'm not loyal to any politician permanently. And I was very loyal when I worked for President Trump. I think I advocated I'd like to think very forcefully, very effectively on his behalf. But my patriotism, my loyalty always lies to the country. What is the best thing for this nation? What's the best thing for our movement? And I would say, secondly, to that issue of being, supposedly bought off. Look, the reality, Jenna, as you know better than anybody, because you're in the media world and so prominent in it, is the non-Trump conservative media world right now is a pretty tiny place. It's not where you would run toward if you only had dollar signs as your goal. Okay, now I think it's going to get much bigger as this primary heats up. But the point is, this is by no means a money play. I don't believe in permanent loyalty to any politician, but rather to principles and to this country. And when I look at the state of this country, which is frankly miserable right now, mainly because of Joe Biden, when I look at the state of this country, and when I look at the imperative for us to win this election in 2024 and follow through on a governance standpoint, from a governance standpoint, which is something that Donald Trump, frankly, was lacking in, right? Great ideas, great bluster, not very great at delivery. When I look at the opposite in Ron DeSantis, it's my view that this political rising star is the next leader for our movement for patriotic populism into 2024 and beyond.
And, Steve, I think that that's a very well articulated, rational, and coherent position that a lot of people who would suggest for people like you or Ken Cuccinelli, who founded the Never Back Down PAC, who I've had on this show as well, that the only possible reason that you could go against President Trump is for money, for some other reason besides rational metric and loyalty to America, I think are coming from people who, frankly, are the ones who are using the Trump brand to elevate themselves, and they're actually
Right.
themselves doing what they're accusing you of doing,
Yeah.
instead of having a rational, coherent argument for why Donald Trump is the best candidate. And I think that there are rational arguments why people can still support him. I think,
Sure.
as you just said, he had a lot of really great policy positions. He had a lot of accomplishments in his record from his 4 years in the administration. But these people who are only Trumpers, I think, are not genuinely willing to look at the entire scope of both the good and the lacking. And they're not really willing to say directly what is good about Ron DeSantis either. And, where I've been attacked most, because I haven't endorsed either one, and a non-endorsement apparently means I'm a never Trumper, which is hilarious.
Right.
But for me, it's all about, like, when you and I worked for Trump, obviously we agreed with the vast majority of his policy positions and all of those things. But even if privately or in the background we're like, yeah, that wasn't a great win, or he was lacking on some of these things, we're not going to say that in public. We are obviously, as advocates on his team, representing his viewpoints. And that's what you
Right.
do as an advocate or as a representative. And even if there were things I disagreed with, I'm not going to go out on mainstream media and say that, because I'm not independent. I was his advocate at that point. That doesn't
Right.
mean you're lying. It just means that you're representing your client or your principal's viewpoint. That's what people do, even as part of a
Right.
company. And so now, though, that you and I don't work for him anymore, and we do have and air some disagreements, that's perceived as disloyalty. And I think that it becomes a huge drawback to rational Americans when you see the campaign so focused on, and actually spending more money on, attacking Ron DeSantis for a stellar record in Florida. I don't care if you
Right.
support him or not for president, he has a stellar record. That's just a fact. And they're trying to suggest that he's like the worst governor in America. How is
Right.
that possibly
Right.
winning over anybody who's rational?
No, it's not. And by the way, it also speaks to a mindset and an approach to campaigning, which will lose in the general election, right? In other words, if you insist on being that inconsistent, that dishonest, if you can insist on attacking Ron DeSantis, even on areas where he is just clearly strong, that tells me that this Trump campaign and this Trump team, and I worry a lot about the team he has around him right now, is totally unprepared to take on the Democrats if they were to win the Republican nomination. Now, I want to forestall that by having Ron DeSantis win the Republican nomination. But I think you're also correct, Jenna, that there's a tremendous amount of projection going on from that crowd. In other words, because they are largely grifting off of the America First movement and off of Donald Trump, they accuse those of us who have a different view of this primary election, who have just chosen a different conservative candidate. They accuse us of that which they are actually engaging in themselves. And so it becomes a bunch of ad hominem attacks rather than talking about policy. And to this point of attacking Florida, I find this particularly interesting. The Trump campaign, this wasn't just rumors or innuendo. The Trump campaign put out an official and very exhaustive list of all the reasons why Florida is failing, which would really be huge news to any Floridian, particularly the new Floridians, the hundreds of thousands of Americans who have internally migrated in our country to the bastion of economic opportunity and sanity on the virus and cultural protection for children. All the reasons that people are moving to Ron DeSantis' Florida. It's far and away the number one state in America on domestic migration. It would be news to them that Florida is some sort of backwater, as the Trump campaign actually wants us to believe. And even worse than that, that's bad enough. But even worse than that, if you pay attention to President Trump's recent statements, and listen, again, I hold President Trump in enormous regard. I think he did great things for this country. I think he was absolutely critical at bringing the America First movement from what was really, a secondary or tertiary political movement into the prominence of American society and American politics. So I have tremendous regard for him, but I also have an ability to be honest about him. Not only did he disparage Florida and disparage Ron DeSantis and what he's done in Florida, he actually had the temerity to praise, which is insane to me, Gavin Newsom of California. Actually said very nice things about Gavin Newsom. So in my view, in those two leaders, those two governors, You have probably the worst in America. I know there's other competition, people like Pritzker and Hochul in New York, but probably the worst governor in America. Certainly the worst record, I think, on COVID and other key issues in Newsom. You have the best governor in America in Ron DeSantis. And yet Trump and his team insist on disparaging the best and actually praising the worst. And look, here's the thing. To your point, too, I do think that if I were still working with President Trump, of course he has an important argument to make of why he should be elected and why he should get a second term. It would be wonderful if he would make that argument and if his team would, instead of using lies and innuendo to try to tear down Ron DeSantis. But it's also, again, it's that very approach. Those are the tactics which I believe, if he were to be the nominee, will lose him the election, because there is an inability to win over the independent voters we need, the people who are not as right-wing as those of us in the America First movement are, people who are suburban women, who are minorities, who have not historically voted with us. They are not going to be won over, in my view, by that approach from Trump. And in contrast, that's the negative side. On the positive side, in Ron DeSantis, we have exactly the opposite. We have a man who, in 2018, when he barely won the governorship, he lost Miami-Dade, the biggest county in Florida. He lost it by 21%. He got clobbered there, like most Republicans do, or at least did, in urban areas. 4 years later, what did he do? He won Miami-Dade by 10%. He moved the needle 31% in only 4 years, which is astounding in a county like that is that diverse and that urban and suburban. That proves to me, and I believe that is the template to bring it nationally, where Ron DeSantis, if he's the nominee, can win over those persuadable voters, those independents, those minorities, those women, and in doing so, beat Joe Biden and start to reclaim this country with the kind of methodical policy implementation approach that he's already displayed in Florida.
Yeah, and that actually makes a lot of sense in what DeSantis is arguing in his Florida blueprint, to say, for people, let's make America Florida. And I think even the most ardent Trump supporters would have to agree that they love the free state of Florida. In fact, so many of them moved to Florida because of DeSantis. And now, if they're in any way wanting Trump's attention, they now have to attack DeSantis and delete their old tweets. And I just think that that's so dishonest and disingenuous, rather than, maybe saying like, oh, well, my opinions changed. Like, for example, people who are regular listeners to this show know that initially in the 2016 campaign, I was on Team Ted Cruz, like a lot of Republicans. And then I was persuaded by President Trump. So I never went back and was like, oh yeah, Ted Cruz is like the worst ever, and I supported him, but now I don't anymore. I just said, honestly, I was persuaded by Trump, and I think he's going to be the best. And I voted for him proudly twice, and ultimately had the very great honor of working for him and helping advance a lot of the policies that he implemented, and helping with the appointments of the 3 Supreme Court justices that eventually overturned Roe versus Wade. I mean, so many of those things. And so I think it's so disingenuous for people now who supported DeSantis, who is, by the way, I think a man of very, very different mettle than Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, to say that somehow his accomplishments aren't as meaningful when there's still, some of them are still living in the state of Florida, reaping the blessings of liberty
Right.
that his administration is providing. And so, so one of the pushbacks, though, Steve Cortes, that I've kind of been getting from people, in this whole argument is, well, Trump is just using the same tactics against DeSantis that he used in 2016. And that was totally effective. So, why are you mad at him now for those tactics when you weren't in 2016? What's your response to that?
Yeah, well, first, I would say the country is very different than it was in 2016. The electorate has changed significantly, and politics have changed in large part, by the way, because of Donald Trump himself. But just because those tactics worked back then, and by the time we get to the 2024 election, realize Donald Trump will have been the dominant figure in Republican politics at that point for almost a decade. In those days, he was firmly the outsider. He was the political renegade railing against the system. But we have to remember, he had 4 years in office, okay? We can't avoid this as much as some of the Trump sycophants want to. Let me give you a specific example of a failure of Trump versus so far a success of Ron DeSantis, and that's related to immigration. Now, most immigration law, of course, is federal, so it's limited what states can do. But Ron DeSantis in Florida just signed the toughest state-based anti-illegal migrant bill in all of America. It's now going to be illegal in Florida to even transport an illegal migrant. He's cracking down on employers hiring illegal migrants, on any locality trying to issue any kind of state-based ID to illegal migrants. So he's taking decisive action as much as he can within the limitations of the state to try to fight against illegal migrants pouring into our country. Donald Trump, conversely, while he spoke very loudly, there was a lot of bluster about illegal migration. The reality is, and I think, again, we have to be reality-based, not emotion-based. The reality is the signature promise of the 2016 campaign, which I was all about at the time and voiced it constantly on every TV show that would have me, which was hundreds at that time, was build the wall, build the wall. He had a Republican Congress, and we did not build the wall. And this crisis at the border right now, which is Joe Biden's fault, it's not Donald Trump's, but this crisis at the border right now would not be nearly as terrible as it is if Donald Trump has followed through on his promise and truly built the wall. I think we need to be reasonable and rational and honest with ourselves. There needs to be some introspection and say, did he do this? If he didn't, why not? And then we look at Ron DeSantis. Is this a man who follows through on his promises? Does he make good on his policy prescriptions once he's given the lever of power, once he wins the trust of the people? And I think if we look at that contrast there, and that's just one really important example of it, COVID's another hugely important example. If we look at that contrast in their records, their approach, their promises versus their delivering on those promises, I believe that not only will Ron DeSantis make the best president of any Republican leader in the country, but I also believe he has by far the best chance of winning. And again, we can have all the best ideas in the world. They don't matter very much if we don't win. We've been losing in 2018, in 2020, in 2022. And I think we as conservatives need to recognize that we cannot be content to be out of power and to be screaming from our couches about how our country is falling apart. And it is absolutely falling apart. But the way to change that is to win elections and then use the power effectively. DeSantis, I believe, is the model for that. He's done it in Florida. He can do it for the entire country. And I also believe my persuasion, my message to folks who right now are very committed to Donald Trump is you are going to get a very ideologically similar agenda. I would actually argue DeSantis is slightly to the right of Donald Trump, but you're going to get a very similar ideological approach, but you're going to get it without the drama and the chaos and the baggage that Donald Trump brings. And you're going to get it in a young man, a rising star with a sterling resume, with an incredible and inspiring life story, with a beautiful family, with a record that he can really, really boast about, who can win over the persuadable voters, the independents, the people that we need to win back the White House. And I would also argue, Jenna, I think this is important, to win all of Washington, D.C. Another thing I worry a lot about, if Trump is the nominee, is I worry not only does he lose, but I think perhaps we jeopardize our ability to take over the Senate. Perhaps we give back the House where we have a very narrow majority. DeSantis has shown us that he has coattails. In Florida, he didn't just win himself in a runaway landslide. Every Republican office holder won statewide office in the state of Florida for the first time since the Civil War era. That's pretty incredible. He has super majorities in both legislatures. I think he will not only win himself if he's our nominee for president, but I believe he'll have tremendous coattails so that Republicans and our movement can take over the levers of power in Washington across the board.
And I think that's a hugely important point, that we do need to be concerned about down ticket. We do need to be concerned about how President Trump has really, in my view, alienated a lot of the independent voters. The polls are reflecting that. And even though, I don't really tend to trust polls as much as President Trump does, that's just the reality that there are a lot of people who are very turned off by his rhetoric. And if we look at the last, several elections, and even, the Senate races in Georgia, in the aftermath of 2020, when, in my view, President Trump was much more focused on, his own concerns than going out and saying, okay, but we've still got to win the U.S. Senate. And ultimately, both of those seats were lost, and that was a tragedy for America. We need to make sure that as conservatives, we are focused on the whole, not just the highest office in the land. But one of the things that I think is a sharp contrast between Trump and DeSantis as well, that we've now become accustomed to in the Trump era, and you and I were kind of on the forefront of this in the media, and certainly as advocates for him, we were some of the most prominent people in the media on his behalf during his administration. DeSantis just doesn't seem to really care about the media. He is not out there trying to do a ton of interviews. He's not out there, focused and so highly obsessed with the media like Donald Trump is. And in my view, that's actually refreshing. I am okay with a president who lets their press secretary speak. They have press conferences, they answer all the questions, but they're not just so focused on going out and posting on Twitter 24/7 their opinions on literally every story in the country. And that was a novel thing when Trump became the GOP nominee in 2016. And I think that as we move forward, I would encourage people to consider the left wants that. I mean, they get their ratings based on him. And if DeSantis is a nominee or even someone else that's not Donald Trump, is there a better equilibrium to kind of make the media more irrelevant again? And, and I say that as somebody who has, national terrestrial radio show, has this show, and we will still have the media. But I actually think that's a great positive of DeSantis.
Yes. No, listen, I totally agree. And if you notice, corporate media is really taking shots at Ron DeSantis, even though if you buy the current national polling, and I have some reservations about it, but he's a distant second place. Now, I also think it's a race between those two. It doesn't seem to me there's any other candidate who's a legitimate threat to win the nomination. But corporate media goes after him. I think exactly for the point you're talking about is that, number one, Donald Trump is great for clicks. Okay, because, and again, I recognize Trump's strengths and I'm willing to voice them. He's a media master, right? He's great at it. I mean, he is a television personality and he has been long before he got into politics, and there are few like him. And so they love him because he's entertaining. There's controversy, there's chaos. It's great for clicks. It's great for viewers. But I think the corporate media also likes him and loves him in a weird way because they know that he'll lose. And this is one of the few areas where I agree with the left-wing media. So they believe that they get sort of the best of both worlds. They get a very tantalizing candidacy full of a lot of controversy, a lot of loud blustering. But then he ultimately loses office and they continue with their leftist agenda onward from there. In Ron DeSantis, they get exactly the opposite. Ron is he's not that exciting. Okay. He's not that entertaining, but it's all about discipline and focus. He brings an incredibly conservative, populist, nationalist agenda and philosophy to his politics and to his governing. And then he follows through with process and determination, with a relentlessness toward goals. He also, I think this is important, he built a team in Florida. There's another reason why I'm backing him. He built a team in Florida that was totally, like him, totally disciplined, coherent, driven, on message. Trump showed a total inability to do that, particularly in the White House. He had a team that was generally marked by upheaval and hired a lot of people, I think we need to be honest about this, hired a lot of people who did not believe in his agenda and in many cases were actually antithetical to his agenda and actually working against President Trump from inside the tent. I mean, you and I certainly saw this at the campaign. It was the case at the White House. That is not the record of somebody who has the discipline and focus to follow through. So look, again, I think we can both appreciate what Trump has done for the country, the good he has done for America and for our movement, and at the same time say, but from here forward, we have a better option. We have a better option who has proven himself on so many key areas and so many key tests in this country. And let's send him as our representative, as our torchbearer for the general election, because it's an imperative to beat Joe Biden, who is ruining this country at a speed that I couldn't have imagined when he took office. Jenna, I was pretty depressed, obviously, like any conservative when he took office. I knew it'd be bad. I didn't think it'd be this bad, this fast. And it's imperative that we win and then follow through on the win. And my view is on both of those metrics, it's Ron DeSantis. It should be our nominee.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that President Trump was absolutely right about in the immediate aftermath of the 2020 election when Joe Biden took office. And he said, will this country even survive the next 4 years? Because of how terrible Joe Biden is. And, as you mentioned, I just want to underscore this point in the last few minutes I have with you, Steve Cortes, that, eventually, whether it's the 2024 election or before, eventually the MAGA movement, the America First movement, America in general will be post-Trump. I mean, that's just an eventuality that and that's why we have elections in this country. That's why we have term limits on the presidency. And so I would encourage people to ask, okay, so, they're supporting Trump now and they say, he is the MAGA movement. Well, what happens after the 2024 election? We have to consider, where are we principled? And if the whole idea is that we only follow Donald Trump, well, what were we even doing as a country before 2015? We have to be conservatives and be Americans first. And if that means people are supporting Trump, fine. If that means that they are like you, moving forward and saying the best candidate is Ron DeSantis, it doesn't, I hate this argument of disloyalty, because you are absolutely 100% right that loyalty is to America and to principles and to being a conservative, and ultimately to, as you and I would agree with, God, our Savior. We have to be Christians first. And so, the last question that I want to ask you as well is, all of these, I would call them excuses for people who push back on, for example, you had mentioned on radio this morning, the same example of, not building the wall. And I got a couple of responses, not many, but a few of, these really hardcore Trump supporters that say, oh, you didn't push back and say, well, we have a wall. And, the only reason that Trump didn't complete it was because the Democrats, or because of, some other thing. And they tend to always say, well, it's never Trump's fault. And so his personnel decisions, his policy misses, or, the things that ultimately, for whatever reason, were not accomplished, it's never his fault. And I find that perspective to be disingenuous, because if we are rational conservatives and rational voters who want the best for our country, we should be honest, as you have been, about Trump's significant wins, but also honest about the misses as well.
Right.
So what do you make of, and what would you say to people who are kind of stuck in this mindset of Trump can do no wrong, and anything, whether it was the appointment of Christopher Wray, or it was, all the way back to Jeff Sessions, or, Bill Barr, or all of these other personnel choices, apparently that include you and me now, even though we were great, but like, we're the worst now too, right? It's like, he hires the best people, and the personnel will be amazing, but now somehow, none of the things that were misses were ever his fault.
Right. No, listen, I would ask people as patriots to hold every political leader to the strictest of standards, right? And to not allow excuse making when it's not valid. And in the case of the wall specifically, we had a Republican majority. Donald Trump got tax cuts through. Those were very important to him. By the way, I think a great idea, big advocate of it, okay? But he got that through. That mattered to him. He did not get the wall through, even though we had both the House and Senate. And I would contrast that with Ron DeSantis also has his party in power in Tallahassee in terms of the House and Senate of the state of Florida. Let's say, for example, hypothetically, let's say Ron DeSantis was not able to protect Florida children against sex change surgeries, against chemical and surgical transitions, which is just an atrocity and an abuse of children. Thankfully, it's now outlawed in the state of Florida and in other red states. He got that done. Let's say he had failed to get that done with the Republican legislature. Well, then he would be culpable. He would be politically liable for that, and it would be proper to blame him, to say, hey, this must not have been a priority to you because you didn't get it through. Well, he did get it done, and he got it signed. And that's what's supposed to happen when you have a chief executive, president, or governor with their legislature or Congress all being the same party in power. So I guess I would implore and ask all the folks out there, all the patriots, let's hold every political leader, DeSantis, Trump, anybody else, let's hold them to the strictest of standards, because ultimately, too, regarding loyalty, not only should we be loyal to principles in the country, right, rather than anyone permanently loyal to any one political leader, but also I think in some ways we almost talk about it in a backwards way. They need to be loyal to us. In other words, they work for us, right? This isn't England. There shouldn't be a coronation here. We are not loyal subjects. Rather, we hire these people to work for us, to work on our behalf in these very powerful offices. My view is, in this case, if we take an honest look at who we should hire, we're going to make the right decision as the managers of America to hire Ron DeSantis, because we may not be the managers of America very much longer if Joe Biden wins again. And I really think things are that dire in this country. I think we're losing our country in very many ways. I think it's savable, but I think the clock is ticking and the window is closing. And because of that, I think it's even more important that we put the absolute strongest, most conservative, most electable candidate forward, which in my view is Ron DeSantis.
Well, Steve Cortes, really appreciate your time today, and also your forthrightness in having political courage and political will to say your opinions this bluntly, and to be an advocate for America, even though, in the midst of all of the attacks and, all of that nonsense, which I think, I mean, you and I took that, quite on the nose a lot of times from people who then were calling us, all kinds of names for supporting Trump, so we're really not that that unused to this whole kind of nonsense. But I think that right now it's just very different coming from what should be our own camp instead of from the natural enemy, which is, of course, the crazy, insane, extreme leftists. But continue to speak up with political courage. Hope to have you on the show frequently. And thanks so much for joining me. Where can people find you and also the Never Back Down PAC?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Jenna. Never Back Down is neverbackdown.org, neverbackdown.org. And then my own personal social media, you can find me on the Twitter. I'm at Cortes, Steve Cortes.
Thanks so much. With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you.
Have you ever picked up a towel set because it felt so soft in the store, but then when you leave and you go to use it, it's not really that absorbent? It's basically a towel that is leaving you out to dry. That's why MyPillow has developed the MyPillow towels that actually work. I know, it's totally mind-blowing. Towels that actually dry you. Their 6-piece towel set includes 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, and 2 washcloths. They come in a variety of colors. I have the sage green and the white. I love them. And right now you can receive a 6-piece set for only $39.98 with promo code Jenna. That's JENNA. So go to mypillow.com right now and click on the radio listeners special. MyPillow products come with a 10-year warranty and have a 60-day money-back guarantee. So to receive this amazing offer on the 6-piece towel set of MyPillow towels, just go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener special, and enter promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, or call 1-800-564-8475. That's mypillow.com, promo code Jenna.